Okay, colleagues, greetings. Hopefully we're live. So, it's the middle of summer, and I'm thinking about the coming academic year. So I'm a bit burnt out on political philosophy currently. So I have this sort of intellectual seesaw. Whenever I do too much political philosophy, I want to swing back towards philosophy of science, especially fundamental philosophy of science, philosophy of physics, quantum mechanics, that kind of stuff. And whenever I do too much of that, my motivation for continuing political philosophy with renewed effort returns. So basically, this may be a bit chaotic. No, actually, this may get completely out of hand and turn into complete chaos. So what I want to do in many ways is an completely unscripted attempt to talk a little bit about issues in in philosophy of science, starting with philosophy of physics, which I think are important. So if you don't want this kind of chaotic presentation, the link to my philosophy of science playlist is actually in the description for this video. Oops. Yeah. So this is very much a work in progress for me. I'm trying to understand, and I feel sort of in general, you understand. There's been let's a little less talking, a little more writing, right? So when we talk about scientific worldview, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, typing and speaking at the same time, but I'll try. We think that there's a number of steps, right? So we begin tentatively with Thales, this attempt to understand the world, to give a rational account of the world. So maybe there are important philosophers outside of the Western tradition, or maybe before Thales. So before or outside, right, of Thales. But I wanna bracket them for the purpose of this presentation. Again, as I always keep saying, I'm sure those of you who will want to pursue this with more seriousness, you will have to do your own research at some point and look at Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, etc., etc. But for our purposes, starting with the West and focusing on the West gives you a certain mileage, which is fine for the purposes of our course, I feel. So you have Thales. Maybe you want to signal out philosophers such as Pythagoras, maybe Democritus. Parmenides, who knows? Do I want to mention Parmenides on this slide? So this could get out of hand very quickly if I do it that way. You know what? Let's do it this way. Whoops. Parmenides. Heraclitus? Yeah, why not? So the basics of philosophical self-understanding in the West. But then, of course, the scientific revolution proper is, may be associated with the name of Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler. Let me write Copernicus. Copernicus, Galileo, Newton. Copernicus, Galileo, Newton. Philosophers of science I know have a very high opinion of Galileo. They tell me that Galileo is a more modern philosopher than Newton. I'm not sure if it's true, but that's a thought that gets thrown around a lot. So then, but like really, this is the beginning of the scientific revolution. This is the beginning of the modern worldview. So there's Copernicus, there's Darwin, and in addition to Darwin, we need to speak about. So let me rush ahead. And Turing. And when we speak about Darwin, very importantly, we need to discuss Nietzsche, Freud, Marx. Freud himself has this notion of the 3 blows to narcissism, sort of the understanding that human beings are not really special in the universe, and this universe is not made for us. We're just tiny ants in this, insignificant, large scheme of things. And I think Freud himself, he talks about Copernicus, Darwin, and himself, Freud, So, and Turing. So basically, this is the emergence of the modern scientific worldview, which, by and large, it's philosophers have a way of debating definitions endlessly. But I want to use the words naturalism, materialism, physicalism as broadly speaking synonymous. And some of the philosophers in this list, like Parmenides and Heraclitus, do not slot neatly into these categories, but that's the basic notion. So let me draw some distinctions from wow, this is not good. Some distinctions from the outset. So you have this, broadly speaking, like intuitive insight, intuitive like animistic insight, mystical animistic insight of the tradition since time immemorial. So there's intuition. Intuition versus what? Versus structural understanding in mechanistic terms. Science, materialism, naturalism, mechanicism, materialism. Let me write structure. So intuition of agency, like intuition of agency, intuitive agency versus structure, whatever. I'm going to explain what I mean in a second. Well, actually, let me start explaining immediately. So the notion is that it's interesting. We're doing philosophy of science, but we are using scientific ideas in order to understand what is science. So there's a bit of a recursion going on. So one of the tasks in the course is to understand, for example, Darwin, and what is the place of Darwin in the in the scientific endeavor, and what are the philosophical underpinnings of Darwinism? Should you believe theory of evolution? And what does it mean to believe? Different people mean different things by the word belief, right? And what is the mode of grounding of Darwinian theory? But then our understanding of what is a human being today is uniquely grounded in the theory of natural selection in Darwin. So there's a bit of a circularity going on there. So the idea is that, so evoking Darwin, we say that in general, human beings, life in general evolves, like human beings evolve. We evolve as, with this agency detection mechanism, right? Like when you're in the forest and you hear something creaking, some crack, some noise, you attribute that to an agent, right? So the idea is that our intuitive thinking is animistic. We attribute agency and purposes to everything. So intuition of agency, right? That like the primordial explanations, the first explanations that human beings have come up with. Do you want to talk about Darwin? So this is like from the standpoint of evolution. Humans are evolved. Evolution. So this is evolutionary psychology, strictly speaking. It teaches us this. It's a whole separate discipline. And you can actually talk about evolutionary epistemology, evolutionary theory of knowledge, and that's a whole separate branch. But I don't want to talk about everything at the same time. So this would be like the primordial form of explanation. This is the first form of explanation that humans use. Like we attribute agency, we attribute, we postulate an existence of a conscious agent. Let's say agents with purposes. So there's a certain kind of animistic character to primordial explanations. And if you think about this in terms of how philosophy is born in the West, again, I understand this is Eurocentric, and this is not the best thing, but one of these days I'll get around to making a more cosmopolitan course. But right now, this is where it's gonna have to begin. I'm working on it. I'm deeply interested in Chinese and Indian philosophy, but right now we're gonna have to start with the Greeks, because that's the story I know better, right? So in the intellectual context of somebody like Thales, who is supposed to be the founder of philosophy and the founder of science, right? The first explanation is animistic, right? Why do seasons change? Seasons change because there are these agents, very powerful agents, gods, and they control the sun, the sky, the sea, right? And there's this wonderful story that I very often tell to students about Persephone and Demeter, right? So Persephone gets into this trouble in Hades, and she's trapped by the king of the underworld, forced to marry him, and so whenever she goes to Hades, right, her mother Demeter, goddess of the earth, gets sad, and so we get winter, and then in the spring there's arrangement between the gods, so there is regularity, but this regularity is rooted in agency. I should be pointing that direction, yeah. Agency, right, is rooted in agency. In a sense that the agents, gods, have made an arrangement among them, and the fact that they keep their arrangement regularly, this leads to the regularity of seasons. And science is born in many ways out of the rejection of this kind of explanation. So what Thales does is he offers the first structural account. Well, we don't have any of Thales' works surviving, so we have to imagine. But the imagination is that there's a certain leap of abstraction. It is not a simple thing. It's difficult, this is difficult and unnatural. This goes against our natural intuitions to explain things by reference to impersonal, objective, abstract patterns. So these would be structural explanations, structure versus agency, structural explanations. And these would have to do with objective, impersonal, abstract patterns. And again, one of the things that Thales very famously does is he can predict an eclipse, right? So presumably the ancients would imagine that such an awesome thing as an eclipse must happen because the gods are really mad. But Thales is going to say no. There's actually an astronomical regularity which has nothing to do with humans' aims or goals or purposes. It's just something that happens, right? And I can predict it with mathematical accuracy. That I'm not sure how much the ancients actually understood about the motions of the planets and the fact that it's actually, the moon that is blocking the sun. This is preliminary stuff, right? So when I'm going to be giving this lecture in September, I should look it up. My intuition is that it's not too difficult. I think they should be able to understand that it's the moon that's blocking the sun. It's not such a difficult astronomical calculation. But I don't want to claim this on my own authority. So don't quote me on that. Feel free to double check, right? But the idea is that if it's just about the regular motions of the planets, maybe it has nothing to do with consciousness or agency or praise or blame, right? And so in general, you get this notion of teleology versus mechanicism. So the Greek word telos means aim or purpose or goal. Teleology versus mechanicism. So teleological explanations appear to purposes, agents with purposes, right? And mechanistic explanations appeal to, again, impersonal patterns, right? So an example here would be an arrangement between Demeter and Hades. The example here would be F is equal to M1 multiplied by M2 multiplied by the constant G divided by R squared, right? So, which is supposed to be like universal exceptionless regularity. Just for fun, let me mention that, of course, this formula is wrong, as we know from Einstein. Einstein's formula may also turn out to be wrong, but so far it has stood the test of time. But that's another difficult thought for students to grasp. Science is not about truth. Should I make this a new slide? I wonder. Science is not about truth. Science is about hypothesis, hypothetical nature of knowledge. So skepticism. Let me write skepticism and fallibilism. Right? So science. I mean, human mind in general is limited. Science is about hypotheses. Best explanation so far, but never the truth. And people talk about deduction, induction, and abduction. I'm not sure how much I want to go into this right now. Abduction means inference to the best explanation. But, presumably, in vogue today, it's in vogue today to say that abduction is the best method that scientists can use. And the idea behind abduction is that, again, that you have a set of data and you have a set of hypotheses, and you choose the best hypotheses that fit the data. But the fit is never 100%. Your observations are never perfect. So better observations can always falsify your hypotheses. Not to mention that there can be other different hypotheses that you have not thought of. Right? So you have like, I'm not sure. Should I talk about this in detail? Should I make this a new slide? I wonder. Right? So abduction. So Bayesian reasoning, Bayesian abduction. Some people already have a headache, I'm sure. Right? So so you look at the hypothesis which best fits the data. Hypothesis which best fits the data. But there's the problem of induction and the problem of deduction. So on the side of induction, like observations, on the side of induction, the problem is that measurement or observation is never perfect. There's always error bars. And to give a concrete example, at one point in time, Newton's theory seemed to be just true, completely true. And then you had to look at the orbits of Mercury with greater degrees of precision. You need to have better telescopes to spot the discrepancies. So that's problem number one. And problem number two is that you never know what are all the hypotheses. What are all the hypotheses? So, like in some sense, this broadly speaking relates to the problem of induction, not exactly, but approximately. And this relates to the problem of deduction. I've spoken about this before. If you want, look up my lecture on Hume or something. I've spoken about this at great length. Maybe you know what this is already. Maybe we'll talk about it some more. So science is never about truth. It is about the best hypothesis so far, which is never a guarantee that things will continue to work in the future. Because maybe your observations will become more precise, or maybe your observations will change. Maybe the world will change. Who knows? This is the problem of induction. Or maybe there are other hypotheses that you have not had in mind, and new hypotheses will come to the fore. And like so far, you say that Newton is the best explanation because it best fits the data, but that's only because there are other alternatives that you have not thought about before. Like, for example, again, Newton has a theory of gravity, but then Einstein has a theory of gravity. And today, for example, we have modified Newtonian dynamics, MOND. It's a different theory of gravity, right? So there's at least 3 different theories of gravity. And at the time of Newton, people have only thought about one of those 3. They had others, Aristotelian theory of gravity, for example. But, you understand. So So it's a deep issue, and I'm not sure if I should even make this maybe a separate slide. It's like people in the street have opinions, but these opinions are very often completely uninformed. And this is something I have to keep reminding students. It's a friendly reminder that most people are wrong, okay? Because most people are not experts. And spoiler alert, probably I am also wrong about most things. Fallibilism. Most people are demonstrably wrong. Because they are not experts. Sometimes people want to put this uncharitably and say most people are idiots. I don't think that most people are idiots. That does not appear to be a very productive statement to me. People are wrong because we live in capitalist society and people don't have enough time to engage in philosophy and science. So I think it's a structural problem. It's nothing to do with human intellect. And we live at a time when there are more people with PhDs alive than there ever were in the history of humanity. And I don't see any reason why this trend should not progress and why we should not have a society in which, let's say, half the people have a PhD. So most people are demonstrably wrong because they're not experts. Think of your grandmother that tells you about meaning of life or what you should eat or how you should raise your children. Your grandmother thinks she's an expert, but is she? Is she? So most people, but so including the experts, but most experts are also wrong. Probably wrong. Because historically speaking, that's the way it has been. If you think of opinions people had 100 years, 200 years, 500 years ago. Well, I mean, what does it mean to say wrong? Wrong in some respects. I mean, we still think, Pythagoras thought that 2 + 2 = 4. We still think that. Pythagoras had his theorem, and we still believe in that 2,000 years later. So when I say wrong, I don't want to overstretch that. But it's like, take everything with a grain of salt. Question everything. Skepticism. But at the same time, you see, that's kind of the interesting issue with this course. This is one of the deep tensions that I have in my own head. Because on the one hand, if you look at the foundations of science seem to be extremely, terribly shaky. Like, science is not built on any kind of firm foundation at all. Science is foundationless. There's this deep methodological skepticism. But at the same time, when you look at the achievements of science, they're actually spectacular, right? And throughout this course, starting September, if you look at my videos from last year, I keep talking about the theory of the Big Bang, lambda CDM cosmology. I keep talking about quantum field theory. I keep talking about Darwinian evolution psychology, molecular biology, etc. So we seem to know a hell of a lot, to use a technical phrase. So there's like this fundamental skepticism on the level of epistemology, but then there's this tremendous amount of things that we think that we know. Being able to send a human being to space and bring them back is no small feat. And it's an interesting it's an interesting conundrum, because like science is very strong and very weak at the same time. What is the right way? So it's skepticism versus the progress, the success of science. But you see, the interesting thing is that if you think about this philosophically, if you think about this carefully, the fact that science is successful, the fact that science has been successful in the past does not guarantee that science will continue to be successful in the future. So, in my own life, I definitely advocate listening to the science, whatever that means, right? So I'm optimistic about science. But on the other hand, and kind of I advise, right? I advertise and encourage my students to do their own research in the sciences. I feel that science has a lot to contribute to individual human life. But at the same time, you have to understand that science is foundationless and science never tells you the truth. And it's like that we should have a bit of humility. So when we talk about this lambda CDM cosmology, when we talk about the Big Bang or quantum field theory, we have to understand these are the best theories so far, but we don't have any firm reason to believe that they are the truth with capital T. So science appears to work, but there are no guarantees. It's the fact that science works is still, it doesn't detract from the fact that science only operates in hypotheses. And I also feel that it's an interesting conundrum, especially when I was younger myself, or when I talk to first-year students. You see, first-year students are not very much grounded in reality. It's like you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, maybe this whole world is an illusion. Maybe I'm in the matrix or in the simulation, or maybe an evil demon is deceiving me. But once you've been doing this for 15 years, 10 or 15 years, and you have these thoughts, you get used to them, because yes, maybe this is all a simulation, and you cannot prove that it's not a simulation. But you also have to pay the bills, you have to do the laundry, you have to decide what you're going to have for lunch today. And it's like, as David Hume says, nature is too strong for principle. Nature is too strong for principle. Reason is and ought to be the slave of the passion. We cannot resolve these philosophical, skeptical challenges. So what we do instead is basically our body takes over. Like, at some point, we just, our body forces us to behave in a certain way. Like, you wake up in the morning and you can be as skeptical as you want about the existence of reality, but if you're thirsty, you're going to get out of bed and go have a glass of water, because it's just far too painful to not do that. And, if you ever engage in some kind of ascetic practice, or ascetic practice, Buddhist, Jain, whatever, Stoic, ascetic practice, it's an interesting experience, and I think it's a valuable experience, but it takes a tremendous amount of effort to break it out, the urges of the body, and I do not think that you can do it reliably for very long periods of time. Buddha ate every day, or I think, or once he became a Buddha, or almost every day, even though he was a Buddha. Now, Mahavira, very famously, died by starving himself to death. It was a conscious choice, and he thought that he was achieving liberation by doing so. So you can do those things too. I'm not saying I recommend them, but it's in the cards. So what's the upshot of all this stuff? The upshot of all this stuff is that you will believe science, because your body will force you to believe science. Again, I'm having a drink of water, and I trust that water will not poison me. Right? When I eat lunch, I look at think of skepticism, think of conspiracy theories. It's like you buy food from the supermarket, but you have to trust the labeling on the packaging, right? You have to trust that those chemicals are not gonna kill you. And think of David Hume says, how do I know that water will continue to nourish me and will not poison me? So somehow or other, my belief that water will not poison me has to do with my David Hume would say irrational faith in science. But I want to say it's not exactly irrational faith, because I understand that science may be wrong. So it is, as Sextus says, my hero, Sextus Empiricus, I acquiesce before the appearances. I give up because the appearances, especially the passions, force themselves onto us. So it's like your body, your passions will force you to accept science. I understand that, and I apologize, I understand that my use of the word science here is a bit tendentious. It's like different people mean different things by science and in different contexts. I could try to somehow try to define what I mean by science here and now. I'm not sure if it can be done briefly. Like one of the upshots of the course is that science is not a clearly definable thing. So, science is not clearly or cleanly definable. So we have to fall back on something like a sociological definition. Sociological definition. Basically, science is what scientists do. And how do you know what scientists do? Well, it's a bit like learning a language. Learning a language means to learn a language, you need to be a member of the community of speakers, shared meaning. And so it's like I want to say this the core of science. So I like CERN, Centre Européen pour Recherche Nucléaire, right? The Large Hadron Collider at CERN. Most people would agree that that's definitely science. And then there are, or let's say people who develop coronavirus vaccines. Okay, again, we have overlapping, overarching consensus that there's science. But then there could be some gray areas. Like, for example, what I'm doing right now, is this science? Is this maybe philosophy or journalism or YouTube? Who knows? I'm open to that. So there are definitely gray areas. Science is not clean around the edges. And people propose this. It's another separate topic. I don't want to talk about this now, but let me mention demarcation. Problem of demarcation of science from non-science. And by and large, I have to say that these projects have failed in the sense that they still have their adherents, but we don't have a universal consensus. Like there are attempts to find clear rules of demarcation, but they don't really seem to work. Do you want to mention Thomas Kuhn? Yeah. If I had to refer to one name, it would be Thomas Kuhn. There are more names, but Thomas Kuhn definitely is one of them. Michel Foucault, in many ways, is another name. Demarcation, yeah. Anyway, so this is unstructured stuff, and I usually talk about all these things in my first lecture, but rushing through them because there's always a million other things I also want to talk about. But let me move somewhere. So I was starting with I feel that the most important intellectual task of science is this, basically, taking these intuitive agency-based explanations and rewriting them in structural terms. So teleology versus mechanicism. And again, yeah. And I want to say that there's this story, and you should not trust this story 100%. So take it with a grain of salt. But I do think it's a very robust story. Again, from Thales and Democritus through Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, through Darwin. I want to say yes, Nietzsche. I cannot spell this time of day. Marx. Through Alan Turing, right? We get this idea, and you could, if you want, you could add structural linguistics. So Saussure, Lévi-Strauss, Michel Foucault, and Jacques Lacan. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making a very controversial assertion. I want to say that all of these philosophers are actually driving towards approximately the same conclusion. I'm sure, again, you see philosophers disagree always, and I'm sure that you can find problems with this argument, but this is my assertion. I want to say that at the end of the day, these philosophers have a common cause. And in some sense, this is for me what physicalism is, what physicalism or materialism or naturalism, what it means. Can I prove that materialism is true? No. But I feel it's the best available hypothesis, and our time is best spent trying to understand it, trying to understand its implications, rather than fighting against it. If you want, it's kind of another moral of the story. If you want to wiggle, moral of the course, if you want to wiggle out of any particular conclusion, you can. There are people who still to this day want to rewrite Einstein's theory to make it more classical, who want to get out of some of the problems with the quantum mechanics. And you can do that. You can always do that. And if you want to believe in God or immortal soul, do some form of dualism, you can do that too. Or free will, you can do that too. But so there are no knockdown arguments against those views. But I feel that those views are deeply futile. It's a strong assertion. So my tentative hypothesis is that they are just a waste of time, and the future is not with them. Although I cannot prove that. So it's a complicated notion. Let me maybe try to give an analogy. It's like if the Earth is flat. If you really want to believe that the Earth is flat, you definitely can. You definitely can. But you need to introduce an increasing number of what philosophers of science call ad hoc assumptions. And it's not that the Earth is flat. It's not that it's wrong. It's unproductive. And if you want to be stubborn about that, I cannot give a logical argument such that your head will explode unless you accept it. No, you can. You can. You can believe that the Earth is flat, but you need to do a lot of hard work. The question is that hard work worth it? And I want to say that the teleological form of explanation is a little bit like flat Earth. So God is like flat Earth. I cannot prove to you that the Earth is not flat in the same way that I cannot prove to you that, let's say, God does not exist. But it's not a useful hypothesis. And people will talk about God. Well, actually, you can talk about teleology without God. You can say that the universe has purposes or values built into it, even if you don't believe in God. So you can believe in natural teleology, you can believe in God. You can believe in freedom. So the spirit of this course, and especially again of physicalism and of naturalism, I feel very importantly, is the realization that free will cannot exist in any shape, matter, or form. Now, you can have some compatibilist version of free will to say that to be free is simply to be determined by the right kinds of causes. But it's like, as a matter of metaphysical fact, I have two hands. Which one am I going to raise? My left hand or my right hand? It's not up to me. There are laws of the universe that determine it's going to be my left hand this time. But in a metaphysical sense, it's not up to me. Now, you could say I was free in the sense that nobody was holding a gun to my head. Or you could say that I was free in the sense that my brain consciously decided to raise my arm. It was not an epileptic fit. Or you could say that my hand was not chained, right? So, there's a sense of the word freedom, compatibilist sense, that is still retained, but it's not what we mean. So, teleology, God, freedom, or immortal soul. This is why Alan Turing is so important in this picture. Because of computation, again, this notion that, well, actually, this is going to be, let me finish the slide, and this is going to be my next thought. So, it's going to be God of the gaps. It's like science cannot explain something, so I'm going to stick God in there as an explanation. So you can have God of the gaps, or you can have freedom of the gaps, or soul of the gaps, or actually flat earth of the gaps. Because in a similar fashion, again, if you spend, you can spend maybe, depending on your training, a year or, a day, a year, or maybe 5 years thinking about this. And you will realize that if somebody really wants to be stubborn, there's absolutely no way you can convince them that the Earth is round and not flat. Well, the Earth is technically not exactly round, but it's approximately round. It's some name of the shape that eludes me. I think it's something has to do with the fact that the shape of the Earth is that it's Earth-shaped. It's a globoid or something like that. I forget. Sorry. I don't remember everything on the top of my head. So freedom of the gaps, soul of the gaps, yeah. Flat earth of the gaps. Right? It's not productive. And again, I invite you on this journey. I don't expect you to believe me in my first slide. In fact, this is the most important intellectual transformation that has happened to me in my life. I was on the other side of this divide. I did not believe in physicalism. I was fighting against physicalism for many years of my life. But then, slowly but gradually, I got converted. And it's a very interesting experience. And it's a very interesting experience partly because I've had certain arguments which convinced me 100%. So conviction is an awful guide to truth, to correctness. Because conviction is an awful indicator of truth. Because again, let me tell you again, as Richard Feynman says, you are the easiest person to fool. Meaning that it's always the easiest thing to do is to fool yourself. And again, I've had arguments in my head, which I thought were completely watertight, arguments against physicalism. And I don't believe them at all anymore. My perception of these arguments has been transformed 180 degrees. There's an argument about cloning, duplication. I'm not sure if I should explain this right now. Let me issue an IOU, because I need to make this argument at a later point. It's an argument about qualia or qualia. Right, this idea of a first-person subjective ontology. And I used to think it was a completely watertight argument that basically a physical object does not understand that it was cloned. Like if you have a stone and you make a perfect copy of this stone, which is impossible to do probably for quantum mechanical reasons, but still, then there's no way of saying which one was the original. And my thought was that if you do the same thing with humans, it's impossible to communicate, but you yourself, you know that there's a difference. Can you know that you are the original? Well, at least you know that there's a difference. Like with the two stones, you swap them around, and if they're perfect carbon copy of each other, there's no way to tell the difference. But if you're not talking about stones but living things, I don't know, human beings, conscious beings, right? Like humans, they can tell the difference. And I thought this was a knockdown argument against physicalism. And guess what? I don't believe this argument anymore. Because I think that there is no way to tell the difference. Because, like in many ways, I feel this is like psychoanalysis in reverse. Because I think that human beings are much less conscious than we give ourselves credit. We lie to ourselves. We overestimate the amount of self-consciousness that we have. I have a video from January about Ship of Theseus and personal identity, where I go into those kinds of arguments. I mean, it's like sorry, this is a horrible digression, but let me maybe finish this thought. Again, maybe I should do a separate video just explaining this stuff in greater detail. I'm sure this is not very clear, but it's like Sean Carroll talks about how in many world formulation, the Everettian formulation of quantum mechanics, the wave function splits and you split. And in an important sense, there's you and there's your copy in a parallel universe. And you can be molecule for molecule identical, but you are not the same person. And once you understand that, even if many worlds is false, even if Everett is false, the next logical step is that from moment to moment, you are not the same person. So the person who has started recording this YouTube video is not the same person as is talking right now. Continuity of personal identity is an illusion. There is no self. There's only a jumble of particles that keep doing similar things. So there's an apparent illusion of stability, but there is actually no stability. Like even a simple atom, like a hydrogen atom, is not a stable thing. It's not a thing. It's a process which keeps repeating itself. So it's like you have a proton and an electron, which through the exchange of the virtual photon, right, there's this intricate dance. There's a vibration in the electron field, and this vibration in the electron field is it couples through the vibration in the photon field. It couples to the proton, which itself is a composite particle, which has to do, which is basically a coupling of the gluon field to the quark field. And, all of this takes place, within gravity, and there's Higgs mechanism. So that, the stability is an illusion. This is a horrible off-topic, but let me just talk about this. Homeostasis. Homeostasis, right? So imagine a Buddhist monk in a deep meditative state of trance. They're sitting there perfectly still and calmly. They are meditating, right? And you say, that is stability. And I want to say, no, it's not. Because underneath the calmness of the breath, every cell in the monk's body is working very, very hard to maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is like vigorous activity. Vigorous. At the micro level that sustains illusion of stability. But yeah, the self does not exist. I mean, on this physicalist picture, right? So there is no self. There's only this sort of dance in the quantum field. There's no self. Process ontology. Processes. Quantum in nature, as far as we can tell. It's always very important to say, as far as we can tell, because we do not have the fundamental theory of reality. You know what? It's like, let's talk about this. Let's not talk about this, but let's just mention this. Time and space. Do they exist? Is there such a thing as time and space? Some philosophers, some physicists today think that maybe they are fundamental, but I think the smart money is that there has to be an emergent mechanism, emergence. That space and time are not fundamental, but there are more fundamental processes which give rise to space and time. Arrow of time due to increase in entropy. Many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Or maybe, let me mention something very extravagant. We have no way of knowing if it's going to bear fruit. But Stephen Wolfram, you might have heard the name, has this age-old dream of deriving physics from mathematics. So Wolfram is trying to make space-time emerge. And I've been listening to a podcast between Sean Carroll and Stephen Wolfram yesterday. It's a 3-hour, very technical podcast, and I'm not an expert, but from the sound of it, Wolfram is either a madman or a genius. He's either dead wrong or he's going to win the next Nobel Prize. If his theory bears fruit in his lifetime. Who knows? We might need more time to know. So maybe even space and time are not fun. You see, this is the interesting thing. People talk about free will. So there's no self, there's no freedom, there's no soul. Say hi to Alan Turing. Well, when I say there's no God, it's like I feel that students lack imagination. I don't mean to be offensive, but it's like if you grow up in a conservative household, there's only one worldview you've been exposed to. Okay, yeah, ideas of God make a lot of sense. But once you shop around a little bit and you realize the kinds of options that we have. So think of Brahma or Yahweh, or think of, I don't know, Amaterasu. Think of Thor or Zeus. Think of Neoplatonic one. Think of the Gnostic Ealdabaoth. Or think of something more extravagant. Think of the Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis. So Bostrom's simulation hypothesis. So people say, oh, there's a God. Well, these days, one of the very popular pictures of the universe is that we are actually a simulation. Like all this stuff is simulation, which is run on a computer by some different species that exist on a more fundamental layer of reality. Bostrom sometimes talks about this in terms of ancestor simulation. You can either Google this, I don't mind, I could explain this some other time, but maybe not now. But, the idea is clear enough, right? Or think about movie The Matrix, right? There's also a simulation, right? But the simulation is by artificial intelligence, right? Think of aliens. Maybe there are aliens who have made this universe. Do they count as God? And if God tells you that sacrificing virgins is a good thing, do you believe God? Well, if aliens tell you that sacrificing virgins is a good thing, do you believe them? If self-conscious AI in the Matrix tells you that sacrificing virgins is a good thing, do you believe them? Right? So this goes back to Euthyphro's question. Right? Even if gods tell you something, should you believe them? And how do you know that they're gods? They can perform magic tricks? Well, again, if you imagine some kind of let's do a little bit of sci-fi here. You go through a wormhole and you appear in the Middle Ages, and sort of you have your phone with you. You can. I think you can legitimately pose as a prophet. Would you be able to convince people that you are either a saint or a witch? Quite possibly. Yeah. With modern, if you could have certain bits of modern technology with you, yeah, you would be able to. Would people then take moral advice from you? You see, I hope you see where this is going, right? So, Brahma, aliens. I'm not saying that there is no God. I'm just saying that it's not a very useful hypothesis once you take all the matters into account. Like, students will sometimes ask me, could it be that there's a God? Yeah, it could be that there's a God. It could also be that there are aliens. And it could also be that, there's a million other things, right? That's the problem with, Pascal's wager. I should do a video on Pascal's wager, because I think Pascal's wager is one of the worst arguments in the entire history of arguments. Kind of this notion that, you're not sure if there's a God or not, but just on the off chance that there is a God, you should believe in God. I feel that this is an argument that works only because Pascal radically lacks in imagination. Because he only considers that there are two possibilities. There's either a Christian God, who's basically true to the Bible, or there's none. But there are so many more possibilities, infinity of possibilities. And for example, this Bostrom's simulation possibility, Pascal had no way of formulating that. He literally could not have imagined that such a thing is possible. And once you take into account the so-called unknowns, there's just no way to estimate probabilities anymore. When we talk about no freedom, this is the very interesting one. I'm tempted to do maybe a separate video on this or talk about this at length in the course. But it's like within Einstein's theory of general relativity, there is no clean way to make time slices. So past, present, and future are relative. Now, if you want to be really clever about it, you can wiggle out of this one. But can you? Should you? What are you sacrificing, right? There's a wonderful, well, of course, the best source ever is Wikipedia. So it's relativity of simultaneity, I think. Relativity. Let me double check if I can find this. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's this wonderful animation. You know. Many thanks to the brilliant folks at Wikipedia who make this stuff available. But yeah, it's working. It's a beautiful picture. So these events, A, B, and C, from different perspectives, they have different ordering in time. So, and it's like, you look at this graph, and then you ask yourself, could we have free will? And you see if past, present, and future are relative. Again, for some observers, A happens before C. For other observers, C happens before A. You know, again, if you want to be really, you know, the same cleverness that you need to employ if you want to be a flat earther. So like if you want to work as a flat earther, you can wiggle out of this. But like in general, this is called like block universe. Probably the easiest way to interpret this picture is that all time is equally real. Past, present, and future are all equally real, and in fact are all equally determined. And you know, it is the feature of our perception that we perceive one moment after another, but actually all moments exist in some sense. I don't want to say that they exist simultaneously because that's smuggling in back the ideas of temporality, but you know, that's the notion. And you know, this is just one argument from a million other arguments that there's no free will. The strongest argument for me is that in general, when I think about my experience, I can give you mechanistic account of basically everything I do throughout the day. It's like I don't feel that I ever do things that don't fit very well into a physicalist picture. I mean, like, why did I decide to marry my wife? Why did I decide to become a philosopher? Why did I decide to start this YouTube channel or this particular live stream? To all these questions, I think that there are very straightforward, physicalist, determinist answers. Let me muse a little bit on this topic, right? So, I'm a big fan of existentialism, and especially of Martin Heidegger. And I had a classmate back in the university, and they used to say the following thing: well, you know, existentialism says that life has no meaning. And, you know, in an important sense, I want to say, yes, life has no meaning. That's a difficult thought to grasp. Most people don't believe that. But I feel it's strongly entailed by this mechanistic picture. If you are on board with contemporary philosophy of science, yes, life has no meaning. And so much so that, in fact, again, like, human beings are anxious and mostly unconscious products of larger forces of biological and cultural evolution. We are manufactured by these forces, not to be happy, not to find meaning in life, but to fulfill a certain function within the logic, perpetuation of the logic of these systems. Right? So life has no meaning. It's like there are causal explanations as to why we are here. So very unsatisfying. So unsatisfying causal explanations as to why we are here. Basically, we are accidents. We are products of random accidents. We are products of random accidents in the path of increasing entropy. It's like, as Stuart Russell puts it, life exists in order to convert CO2 into CH4. Or maybe it's to convert CH4 into CO2. I don't remember exactly. You'll have to look this up on your own. So where we come from a place of meaninglessness. Our origin is the meaning, is randomness. Our father and mother are random chance. But then our life also has no meaning because we're not going anywhere. The universe is going to end in a heat death. So this is our unsatisfying beginning, and there's an unsatisfying end. And this is a heat death of the universe, maximum entropy state. So like everything you do, all of wonderful achievements, don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. The sun is going to burn out. Black holes are going to evaporate through Hawking radiation, and the universe is going to be a dark, cold, and lonely place, and nothing will matter. Nothing you do ever matters in the grand scheme of things. This is why I think it's so important, intellectually speaking, to think through these issues and to, how should I put this? To do intellectual work in trying to think through the teleological and the religious worldviews. Teleological and religious worldviews exist not because they have any claim to truth, but because they are simply much more comfortable. This is the causal explanation as to why people, it's like, because again, most people in the history of the universe are wrong. If that's a very strong claim on my part. How can I substantiate? So I need a theory to explain as to why most people are wrong. I give you a theory because they are wrong because it's a narcotic. Religion, as Marx says, is the opium of the people. It makes life more comfortable. Religion is not true. Religion makes life more comfortable. Now again, treat my words with a grain of salt. It's a hypothesis, but that's the idea. But you see, within the, let's say, Christian or Jewish or Muslim, whatever, worldview, right? You have this notion that if you have a splinter in your toe or a pimple on your forehead, or if your beloved cat dies in a tragic accident, this has meaning in the large scheme of things, in the structure of the universe. This has meaning and purpose. Nothing is in vain. Whereas within this physicalist picture, nothing has any meaning. Everything is random. And, if you stare at this picture for long enough, so I have my Turing, and notice I have Nietzsche, and Nietzsche talks about this very, very much. And I feel that Nietzsche understands this very well. That, once you realize that, the reevaluation of values, you realize that God is dead, you realize that there are no capital V values. There are only small v values that human beings imagine or invent, but they do not have the same kind of moral or axiological status. And Turing, or people like Lacan and Foucault and Lévi-Strauss, are going to explain to us, or Freud, going to explain to us how we don't really understand ourselves. Like, I've had this picture for many years of my life, that natural selection was blind, and then humans evolved consciousness, and suddenly there was light. Finally, natural selection is no longer blind, but you can have something different. Right? Conscious, rational selection, rational evolution, progress. But then I realized I got it backward. It's not like evolution was blind and then humans evolved consciousness and suddenly there was like, no. It's everything is blind. And we say that we understand things, but actually we don't. We tell certain stories, but we don't understand deep meaning behind those stories. It's like you don't expect an ant to have a theory of anthood, of what an ant is. You don't expect a chair to have a theory of a chair. Why should human beings have a theory of human beings? You know, it doesn't. It's like birds sing, birds make noises, and humans make noises. You don't think that bird noises have any meaning. By the same token, human noises also don't have any meaning. We are products of these, again, structural forces of biological and cultural selection in the increase of entropy. And to continue this story, my classmate used to say, well, you see, life has no meaning, so it's wonderful because you get to pick whatever meaning you like. And I want to say that's such a naive thought, because no, you don't. You get to pick it's like, yay, you get to pick the meaning you like. Right? I want to say no. No, absolutely not. Because, we are thrown into this world. And in many ways, the choice is made for us. Our body takes over. Reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. We don't get to choose what to value in life. We find ourselves thrown into this world with dispositions. And we make choices, but only on the basis of things that we in turn do not choose, that we in turn never choose. So no, it's not up to you to make whatever meaning of life that you want. And as a matter of fact, so this is the course's philosophy of the natural and the social sciences, and I feel this is a very strong and very important point of connection between natural sciences and social sciences. The famous is-ought problem. How do you derive values from facts? And standardly, the idea is, of course, you cannot derive values from facts. And I want to say, broadly speaking, yes, you cannot derive values from facts, but so you cannot. But you can ask the question, where do our values come from? Because the point is that we don't choose our values. We find ourselves with our values already given to us. This is why a very important part of my identifications of philosophers is actually utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is misused. I'm used to these things. It's like Plato was not a Platonist, Marx was not a Marxist, Jesus was not a Christian, probably. Do you have the Gospel of Thomas? Yeah. Wonderful book I can recommend. The Gospel of Thomas. Read it sometimes. Page 116. Maybe we'll do this reading at some point. I'm being slightly, controversial for rhetorical reasons. So take it with a grain of salt. And Heidegger was not an existentialist, and John Stuart Mill was not a utilitarian by the standards of the day. But I feel that it's like that. There can be, I agree with Epicureans. There can be no meaning in life except for gratifying your desires, because that's what human beings are. As Thomas Hobbes says, life can never be without passion, without desire, in the same fashion that life cannot exist without motion. And contemporary biology, I think, agrees with Thomas Hobbes very much, right? And so, as a matter of fact, what human beings do is they gratify their desires. Now, human desires can change and they can vary, but there's nothing more to it over and above that. There are nuances, and there are different desires and interesting things that you can do and talk about, higher and lower pleasures, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, human beings are driven by passions. So it's like you can wake up in the morning and decide that, as following Mahavira's example, you're going to starve yourself to death, or you're going to asphyxiate to death. You're going to prove to somebody or something that you are not determined by your biology, and you're going to stop breathing and just die from asphyxiation. Just hold your breath and die. You can do that. Like, nobody's preventing you. But it's like, there's no point in that. There's no point in anything, and there's also no point in that. So once you get over that thought, the only thing that you can do is you can try to make life palatable to yourself. And I feel that's the only motivation that human beings can have, and that's the only motivation human beings should have. Try to make life palatable to themselves and to others. It's like if you decide to marry somebody, it's because you think that you and they are going to be happier in this marriage. If you decide you want to take this job, it's because you think it's going to be good for you and for society. If you want to, let's say, have children, it's because you have a reasonable expectation that your children are going to be happy and you're going to be happy. And you can debate what the word happiness means, but I feel that's the only game in town. And when people talk about deontology versus consequentialism or utilitarianism versus Kantianism, I think it's a non-starter. And do I expect you to believe my conclusions? No. I don't expect you to believe my conclusions. That's kind of the last thing that I want, right? But these are my tentative conclusions at this point in time. I think that physicalism entails certain form of utilitarianism. Historically it was true. I mean, Thomas Hobbes, one of the first thoroughly physicalistic philosophers in the history of Western philosophy, was a proto-utilitarian. So as a matter of fact, it's historically true. And whenever I talk about, let's say, Marx, right, and Marx's vision of communism, I don't think that Marx's vision of communism can work on any other premise. That ultimately, the deep axiological grounding of communism has to be some form of utilitarianism, some form of consequentialism. I feel that most people who disagree with me just have a different notion of utilitarianism. Like, it needs to be made more precise, more rigorous. Some problems have to be dealt with. Some things have to be stated more clearly. But anyway, I feel this is a very important point of connection. We'll talk about this. And of course, our values are given to us not only by our biology, but also by our society. And this introduces I don't want to say infinite, but this increases complexity by several orders of magnitude, because social science is so much more complicated than biological science. It's kind of another deep thought and deep problem in philosophy of science. It's a problem of reductionism. Well, it's a problem of emergence. Problem of reductionism, right? That we imagine that physics gives rise to chemistry gives rise to maybe, let's say, organic chemistry gives rise to biology gives rise to psychology. Well, actually, I mean psychology and group dynamics. Psychology and group dynamics, which is group theory, social theory. And there's this graph of increasing complexity. Well, I'm not sure. I won't be able to draw this quickly, but you understand. This increasing entropy and complexity is an inverse parabola. And social theory is at the peak of complexity. But again, the interesting thing about this is that reductionism, in a methodological sense, works, but in a certain straightforward sense, it doesn't work. Because you think if you understand the laws of physics, then biology should be solvable. But it doesn't work that way. So I have my equation. I'm not sure if I can. Can I get it out quickly? So this. Yes. Some of you can see this coming, right? My favorite formula of all time, right? So you have the Lagrangian of the standard model of particle physics. And you'd imagine, well, we have the formula. Let's just solve the formula and we'll solve all of chemistry, all of biology. But it doesn't work that way. Because this formula is far too complicated to solve. Like, literally, there's not enough computational power to use this formula to model even simple chemical reactions. And there's not enough computational power to use this formula to calculate how coronavirus is going to behave. Or how vaccines are going to affect coronavirus, right? It's an interesting thought, levels of complexity. You can understand the principles at the lower level very well without really making much of any progress at the higher level. And you can have higher level emergent laws. You can have in reverse. You can understand something about biology without understanding anything about physics. Or you can understand something about social theory without understanding anything about physics. So ultimately, it has to hang together. But as a matter of way of doing science, these can be completely disjointed enterprises. But I feel that the task of philosophy of science is to give us a unified picture. From protons to presidents and from electrons to elections. And like in terms of complexity, presidents and elections are among some of the most complex things in the universe. More complex than neutron stars or black holes. In fact, neutron stars and black holes are actually quite simple. I have a whole checklist of things I want to talk about. Maybe this is a good time as any to take a break. I'll continue down the line. Anyway. So, but to try to maybe do a bit of a recap. Yeah, I feel that again. This notion of teleological versus mechanistic worldview. This is the most interesting problem. This is the most fruitful problem. So again, teleological versus mechanistic picture. And one way, maybe what I want to do next time is I want to look at, well, to some extent at ancient Greeks, but to some extent also at contemporary physics. And usually what I do is I talk about Heraclitus and I mention, well, but Heraclitus is a little bit like the standard model of particle physics. Well, maybe we can do it the other way around. Maybe we can talk about the standard model of particle physics, like the philosophy of physics in the 21st century, talk about the wave functions and, where the particles exist and what happens with quantum mechanics, and then, bring Greeks a little bit in as well. But sort of as a recap and as a preview at the same time, like the most important takeaway point is that the ancients thought that somehow mind was superior to matter. This is the ancient intuition. Mind is superior to matter, and mind gives rise to matter. But like the goal of modern science, and again, we have to be a bit careful with this phrase. I don't want to use it too lightly. Is no. In fact, sort of again, for the ancients, it was like for Neoplatonists, for example, they thought how they had imagined this picture where mind emanates matter, mind creates matter. But today, so Neoplatonic picture where mind emanates matter. But today, due to somebody like Turing, right, Alan Turing, we have this notion, that you can have a physical system which is indistinguishable from a conscious agent. So, matter creates mind in a sense that, you can have mind made out of matter, basically a computer. And it's an interesting question, which I kind of want to bracket, because this is, I teach this course and I enjoy teaching this course tremendously, partly because it allows me to push my understanding forward. And this is something that I have some thoughts on, but my mind is not made yet, and I'm not sure where exactly I stand on this issue. And this is the problem of information and computation. Because some contemporary philosophers of physics, like Stephen Wolfram, for example, Stephen Wolfram, or in quantum information theory, this black hole information paradox, many philosophers are actually tempted to say, I think Max Tegmark maybe has something similar, that information is universal. Actually, information is a feature of the universe, right? Or Wolfram is going to say that computation is a feature of the universe, right? Computation is inherent in the basic structure of the universe. So computation is basic to the processes of the universe. And I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about it. Maybe yes, maybe no. I haven't thought about it. But again, would this mean that consciousness is inherent in the universe? Well, probably not. But again, the point I think of contemporary, again, physicalism, or naturalism or materialism, physicalism, materialism. And it's an interesting thing, right? Immanuel Kant wrote to his friends in a letter that the most important task of philosophy is to explain how an immortal soul can fit into the material reality, right? And so centuries have passed, we're still struggling with the same question, right? And I feel it's a very important question, but my answer is diametrically opposed to that of Kant, right? Kant wanted to split the difference and to say, is Kant a dualist? Well, there are important elements of dualism in Kant's metaphysics, right? But today, with Turing, we want to explain that away, explain away all semblance of teleology, all purposes, all meaning. And you see again this notion that there's no meaning to anything and there's no meaning to life is kind of inherent in this physicalist picture. So this is the takeaway point, to some extent, from today's talk. Although I did not really substantiate this conclusion, I mostly just stated it in various ways. And this is, I guess, the preview maybe for next time, and an invitation for you to take this up maybe in your own time as well. So let me actually look at the chat. Because why not? It's fun, and I think I'm gonna wrap this up in a bit, and we'll continue sometime. My schedule is a bit chaotic these days. Surprisingly, I have a lot of work to do during the summer. I'm mostly preparing for the new year, but a whole host of other things I need to do. But somebody's saying in the chat that the Earth is a geoid. I wonder if it's true. Yeah, geoid. Yeah, thank you. I think it's Nikolai, right? Thank you, Nikolai. Vitaly is asking, why can't we call self a process? Yeah, that's the whole point. You see, I feel that, the word Buddhism doesn't mean much because different people mean different things by Buddhism. But I genuinely think that there's a certain deep insights in some philosophical forms of Buddhism, like Vasubandhu, philosophers such as Vasubandhu or Nagarjuna. Maybe I should add this to the slide. So Buddhism. There are articles on Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So if you want, these are good places to start. The idea is the self does not exist exactly. The self is just the self is a process. But you see, the point is that there is no continuity. Continuity is just an illusion. You take a cucumber and make slices out of it. Each slice is a separate slice. When you put them together, there's a certain illusion of continuity, but you have sliced the cucumber in many different slices. So there's an appearance of continuity. Maybe there's even some causal connection between the slices. But the slices are genuinely different. Like you at this moment in time and you 1 moment ago, you are like identical twins. Mm-hmm. You look very similar, but you are not the same person. if you think about this like in a metaphysical, ontological sense, right? Your identical twin, especially if you like imagine some kind of thought experiment, like two newborn identical twins, right? They are very similar. Imagine they're somehow they have been cloned, so they're molecule for molecule identical. But you understand they're not the same person. If you poke one of them feels pain and not the other. Like your relationship to your past selves is similar. And for Buddhism, this is supposed to be deeply liberating. You should understand that this means that you can take it easy. You shouldn't worry about stuff. And achieve enlightenment this moment, because you only exist for one moment. Sorry, that's a bit of an oversimplified conclusion, but I mean it in some sense. Okay, Vitaly and Nikolai are having a very complicated conversation in the chat, which I need to pause and read carefully. It's a bit too difficult for me to respond in one phrase. Well, anyway, colleagues, this has actually been going for slightly more than 80 minutes. 80 minutes, as you know, is the standard academic class, so as good a time as any to take a break. So I hope this was fun. Maybe this was actually slightly less chaotic than I planned. If time permits, I would very much hope to continue doing these live streams. I don't really have time to prepare serious videos over the summer, so serious videos with a lot of preparation, production value are going to come in September probably. But before that, like throughout summer, I hope to get out some videos like in this kind of format, something I don't have to prepare for. Actually, some people have been writing to me, which is very encouraging. Some people have been writing that they find my videos useful, and I am extremely happy to see those kinds of emails. And people have asked me to comment on a bunch of things. So specifically, there was one request to talk about Marx and Nietzsche. And I'd love to do that, because I feel this would be an excellent topic. Nikolai Poulsen from Denmark wrote to me, and I promised Nikolai I'm going to make this video, and I will. It's a bit overdue, but I will. And there was another person who wrote to me asking about Slavoj Žižek. And I hope to get to Žižek as well, although that's going to be more difficult because I'm going to need to do some preparation. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about Žižek from the top of my head. But I have to tell you, everything I've seen by Žižek, everything I've read, I'm not an expert, but everything I've seen and read by Žižek, I love. I think he's one of the foremost intellectuals of our time, but I'm not sure. Hemant Mully asked me to talk about Žižek. Thank you, Hemant. And there was another person who asked me to do a video on Freud, and I'd love to do a video on Freud, and I promised to do a video on Freud, but this one is going to be easier, hopefully. So somebody with a nickname BC. Thank you, BC. Definitely, I actually have a lecture on Freud, but it's in the draft form. I want to do that, and I want to do Lacan, because actually some of you know that Foucault is definitely a very important interest of mine, and I do talk about Foucault a lot, and I have a way of presenting Foucault in about an hour. I don't really have a satisfactory worked out way of presenting Lacan in an hour, but this is something I definitely want to do. I feel that Lacan is one of the most important philosophers for our time. He's one of the maybe 5 or 6 names. I think Lacan is definitely more important than Freud. I don't think Lacan is more important than Nietzsche or Marx or Foucault, but you know, he's definitely at the top of my list. Heidegger is also very important, but my understanding of Heidegger is Lacanian, and Lacan himself was influenced by Heidegger. So yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot give you a heads up on any dates in terms of my schedule. My schedule is a bit chaotic these days. I was actually supposed to be recording a lecture on Nietzsche today, and it got canceled for bureaucratic reasons. You know, nothing. You know, for logistical reasons, nothing to do with me. So I had some randomly had some free time on my hand, so I decided to do this. So if I do have some openings, I'm gonna hope to continue this. So anyway, I'm looking at the chat. And I think we're good for today. So anyway, colleagues, thank you so much for hanging out. I hope this was interesting. I hope everybody's staying safe and taking care. Oh yeah, coronavirus and vaccines. This is, I should maybe. So it's a very dangerous topic, very controversial topic. But I feel maybe I'm not sure if I should do a video, but I'm sure we're going to have a lot of very productive discussions with students of political philosophy and with students of philosophy of science. Because vaccination, the safety of vaccination, the personal choice to do a vaccine is both an interesting problem in political philosophy, in moral philosophy, and also is a very interesting problem in philosophy of science. To what extent can we trust experts? And sort of how much does power influence expertise? Right? So like interface between philosophy of science and philosophy of politics. So I don't want to comment on this right now, but it's been in the news lately, so I've been thinking about that too. So anyway, colleagues, I hope everybody's staying safe in these interesting times. So take care. Let's keep in touch, and I'll see you around.